Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Virginia Film Festival's Beyond the Screen conversation series. This week, we're pleased to welcome our special guests, the director and producers of the new documentary film, A Secret Love. And now, I'd like to introduce our panelists and moderator. Director Chris Bolan has had a career both on and off Broadway, performing as an actor and director with many top regional theater companies in both the United States and Canada, while also working in film and television. Chris recently directed the documentary feature film, A Secret Love, premiering on Netflix and the focus of today's discussion, based on a member of the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League made famous by the Hollywood movie A League of Their Own. Recent projects include the Broadway production of The Sound Inside, starring Mary Louise Parker, directed by David Cromer, as well as the Broadway national touring production of Jitney, directed by Ruben Santiago Hudson. Alexa Fogel, producer. Through her Beach Hill Films banner, Alexa produced the feature documentary A Secret Love, which was also a South by Southwest 2020 official selection. Alexa has received 3 Emmy Awards for her work as the casting director on True Detective and NYPD Blue, and has earned 5 additional nominations. She produced the recently released feature film One Last Thing, starring Wendell Pierce, Journey Smollett-Bell, and Joanne Favah. Recent projects include This Is Where We Live, Helena from the Wedding, Fat Boy, Run, directed by David Schwimmer and starring Simon Pegg and Thandie Newton, and A Hole in One, starring Michelle Williams. Brendan Mason, producer and co-writer. Brendan produced and co-wrote A Secret Love and is a longtime producing partner with Alexa Fogel. Brendan has also worked on such productions as This Is Where We Live, Helena from the Wedding, Jimmy Blue, Run, Fat Boy, and A Hole in One. During his tenure at Beach Hill, he has worked in various capacities in both development and production. Prior to his time at Beach Hill, he worked at Paramount Pictures. Today's conversations will be moderated by Bonnie Hagerman. Bonnie Hagerman graduated cum laude from Princeton University in 1991 and earned her PhD in history with a concentration on American social history at Ohio University. She's taught at the University of Virginia since 2008 and is an assistant professor, general faculty, in the Department of Women, Gender, and Sexuality, where she also serves as director of undergraduate programs. Hagerman has taught a variety of courses for the department, including A History of Gender and Sexuality, 1865 to the President, A History of Feminism in America, and courses that explore women, gender, and sport. Thank you all for joining us today, and now I'll turn it over to you, Bonnie, to start today's conversation.
Great, thanks, Jody, and thanks, Chris, Alexa, and Brendan for joining us today. And thanks to all of the attendees who have signed on. Just a reminder to feel free to post questions in the Q&A box, and we will look to incorporate those towards the end of our time together. Our discussion today is particularly timely given Monday's Supreme Court 6-3 decision that prohibits discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity in the workplace. And Chris, I wanted to start with you and ask you about that first scene in the film, which shows Terry referring to Pat as her cousin when she speaks on the phone. But throughout the documentary, she becomes increasingly open about her relationship with Pat, even directly asking the director of the assisted care facility about the acceptance of same-sex couples because they were one. Could you tell us from your perspective as Terry's great nephew a little about that journey of increased openness that took Terry and Pat from a time in which they faced deportation if their relationship was discovered, to celebrating a legal marriage, and then of course, you know, the recent developments of Monday?
Yeah, listen, that was at the core of the film, and it was a 7-decade journey for them and for our family. They predate my mother. They met in the 1940s. So I had always known them as my great aunts, Terry and Pat. They referred to the biological family to themselves as good friends. They had both been engaged to men. They had both had several boyfriends. And throughout the years, obviously questions came up. I hear from a lot of people saying, how could your family not have known? And my response is that we had asked them point blank a number of times, are you gay? Are you lesbian? And to which they answered no. We're good friends. It's expensive to live in Chicago. And we just left it at that. And so we took them at their word, and didn't push it any further. Now we flash forward, of course, to 2009. I had just finished my graduate degree at NYU Tisch. I had flown out to Chicago to visit my great aunts with my wife, Megan. And we had a wonderful lunch, and we went back to their little home in St. Charles. And, you know, they love to play cards and have rum and cokes. So that's, of course, what we did. And then they said, we have something to tell you. We're gay. And of course, my wife and I said, thank you so much for telling us. We're so happy you've come out to us. And then the floodgates opened up for both of them in a way that I had never seen. And I started to hear stories about a life that we had never been privy to, the biological family had never been privy to. And beautiful stories. I mean, I remember one, that this is kind of what started getting my mind going about turning this into a film, about them kissing in the middle of a dust storm in the province of Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan in the 1940s. And then no one could see them because it was a dust storm. So the lengths that they went to hide, because you had to at that time, it was taboo, it was not allowed. And all these stories started coming out, and obviously I was compelled to make a film about it. But after those floodgates had opened up, it was wonderful because we started to see and hear a whole part of their life that we'd never heard before.
Well, it's just a fabulous, fabulous story. And Alexa and Brendan, I'd like to ask you about how you came to that story. You both are longtime producing partners. Can you talk a little bit about how you came to the project and the unique challenges facing you both as producers on this?
Well, I have another career as well. I'm a casting director. And when Chris was a graduate student at NYU, I taught a workshop there. So that's initially how I met Chris. And sometime later, he asked if we could talk about a documentary idea he had. And generally, Brendan and I we certainly hadn't done any, but for good reasons. But he told me a little bit about the story, and it's so completely unusual and unique that I think I went right back to Brendan and said, I think we're doing our first documentary. And then we decided you can take what we decided to do next.
We just said, we should go to Chicago and meet them, because yes, it was kind of an amazing story that she had played baseball in this league. Remarkable that someone's coming out in their late 70s, because there's the question, that's a lot to put yourself through. So you want to hear that story. But we said, let's go meet them, because you have no idea what they'll actually be like in person. So we go, and the first night at dinner, they said, we're making you dinner. And Alexa and I were sitting at the dining room table with Terry, the ball player. Pat and Chris were one room away, and Terry would just giggle and light up talking about Pat. And Alexa and I were in the kitchen afterwards, and we just looked at each other and said, after 60 something years to be giggling about the person that you are with is a pretty remarkable thing. And we just felt, we don't have a choice. This is what we're doing. And really, truly, it was that simple. We just dove right in.
And I'm sure that this is not new to anyone who's worked in the doc field, but the biggest hurdle to overcome was money. We kept running out of money, which is why it took so long. They were of a certain age. So there was an urgency to it, for sure, as time went on. And as they aged and health issues started to come into this, it also sort of changed the course of the direction we're all going.
That was definitely an added, you become very emotionally invested in the people you're working with, because you can't but help love Pat and Terry. And it becomes kind of like an addiction that you have to finish this and see it through. But to have the added pressure of two people who were not young in their years, both of whom had various health problems over the course of, it was a 7-year production in total. it was, it was a lot of motivating factors that we really had to deal with.
Although Brendan pointed this out once, they were never very sick at the same time.
Yeah, ever. It's amazing, actually.
Thank God.
Well, and that was, of course, a concern of your moms, Chris, that, what would happen if both of them were sick at the same time and lived far away from home. And it was interesting, though. I mean, it was a story certainly about family and about Terry and Pat, maybe Pat a little bit more, fighting for a hard-won independence that they had kind of created over time. Brendan, you referred to a League of Their Own and of course Terry's baseball career with the Red Wings, Peoria Red Wings. I wanted to talk a little bit about that because a League of Their Own, of course, Terry talks a little bit about A League of Their Own, which is the 1992 film starring Gina Davis and Tom Hanks, and is what most people think of when they think of the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League. And I appreciate that the League of Their Own got a lot of things right. The chaperones, the charm school, the dresses for uniforms. Penny Marshall, as director, even touches on the fact that the league is segregated, that Black women are willing, they are able to play in the league. It's about a 6-second clip, which is unfortunate, but there is at least some kind of acknowledgement of that. What the film doesn't acknowledge is a range of sexual orientations by the players themselves. And I wonder if you all see this film as an important corrective to that narrative in which, the players are portrayed as extremely feminine and entirely heterosexual.
I think we do, but there's a caveat to that. Yes is the answer to your question, but at the same time, we were telling Pat and Terry's story. So that's the story in terms of sexuality that we felt comfortable as documentarians. And Chris, Alexa, and I have talked about this a lot. That's the story we felt comfortable telling. It's not our job to be outing anybody else. And, you can do a little digging, not too deep. I'm sure a vast majority of the women in that league were gay, but that's, we wanted to be very careful about all of that.
But probably not out. So to be fair to A League of Their Own, that narrative may have been something that carried up to 1990.
Certainly there's I think more increasingly a number of those players coming out talking a little bit more openly about their sexuality. But the league's emphasis on femininity, always femininity, a number of scholars have talked about, the importance of femininity at all costs in that particular league as kind of a guard against the league being associated in the 1940s with lesbianism, which I think is a really interesting piece. And this veneer of femininity is certainly something that both Pat and Terry talk about in their work lives as well. The idea that they were always dressed, makeup, heels, dresses. I think it's Pat who says, or Terry who says everything. We did everything.
Yeah.
Is there a feeling that they were somewhat exhausted by the need to constantly kind of affirm their femininity, both at work and kind of at home, with again these threats of raids, and if you weren't wearing the right number of feminine articles of clothing, you could be arrested? Is there a sense that they were that this was a burden that they were carrying?
I never got that sense.
I can jump in a little bit. They, two things there with the baseball. It was funny because I often asked Terry about that, and she said, Chris, do we like it? No. Do we like sliding in skirts on lime driven, the baseline where get into some wounds and it would burn? No, we didn't like that. None of them liked that. They joked and they called it the lipstick league. But at that point, they loved baseball, and they were these skilled professional women's baseball players. So it was a time when they did what they had to do to play ball, to play something that they loved. So they ended up, Terry often said that they jumped the hoops. They played the game. They did what they needed to do to play, well, I guess the double meaning of the game, baseball and you know, how women were perceived at that time. And the second thing, as they got older, I remember Terry and Pat joking with me a lot that I think there was a slight burden, because they said after we left Watson and Bowler, after I left the merchandise mart where Pat worked after Watson and Bowler in Chicago, after they retired, they never put on a dress again.
Oh, that's so interesting.
You know, they joke, they'd been there, and I never saw them in dresses. I think when Terry got inducted into the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame, I was there, and certain moments like that, she would put on a dress, and I remember looking at her as a boy, going, "Wow, I've never seen you in a dress before." But they always wore pants and shorts, and they were always feminine. You know, there was a femininity still. I mean, you know, they like to look nice, but that burden of like dresses and all of that, to your point, was interesting, because they wanted just to get rid of that.
But I have to say, as a woman who certainly looked up to both of them, there is, you know, they got their hair done every week. Pat never left the house without putting on lipstick. I mean, it's there. I'm sure that Chris is right, that the burden of the workplace, for sure, but they are of a certain age, and that was also important to them, just kind of on their terms.
Mm-hmm.
You're right, Alex. I mean, Pat didn't access Hollywood. It was great, but she needed to get her hair done. She would not do it if her hair was not done. So yes, I agree, Alexa, with that.
Truly words I never expected to hear in my life are, Pat refuses to do Access Hollywood unless she can get her hair done first.
During a pandemic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about Pat and Access Hollywood? Is she how's she dealing with some newfound fame as a result of this wonderful film?
Oh, she is in second heaven. She is just, she loves it. She still can't understand why people want to watch this movie, which I find incredibly endearing. I always have. That's why we wanted to make the film. But she loves it. She's getting fan mail from all over the world. People are writing her poems, saying that I wish my lover wrote poetry to me like you wrote to Terry. You know, people are drawing sketches and cartoons of her and Terry and sending her letters, how their story has changed them, has given them the courage to come out, has given them the belief that they can live the life that they want to live. I mean, both her and my mother have heard from people all over the world, and she loves sitting there reading these letters and in hearing about how it's resonating with people on a global scale. So it's really special for her. And you know what? She was always in some degree in Terry's shadow. So it's kind of nice. It's nice for her to be out front with this.
So you referenced the poems, which, you know, there's so many things to love in this film. And one of the things I was just so intrigued with were the home movies and the photos and the poems. A little bit about how you decided which ones to include, and maybe a favorite item that you wanted to make sure to showcase.
Well, I'll jump in quickly, but with the 8mm, when I found that suitcase, that 1950s suitcase, buried in their basement, 2.5 years into filming, it was like the clouds parted. And oh my God, I told Brendan and Alexa, I said, if you know, I screw up this movie now, I'm the worst director that has ever lived. So and Brendan and Alexa, I think, agree. We used every second of that 8mm footage. I don't know if we left any out on the cutting room floor. It gave it such depth and texture and showed a 7-decade journey of these two women in such an interesting, beautiful way that, yes, we used every second of it.
Did you know it was down there? I mean, did they say, "Oh, we've got a suitcase down there," or did you just happen to stumble upon it?
We had been asking for the first couple of years, hey, do you guys have old photos? Do you have anything that we could kind of use once we edit the movie? And for the first 2.5 years, I think they had forked over about 14 photos and one rusty film can. So we thought that's what we had. And then when they were moving out of their house, they said to Chris, go down in the basement and there's a blue suitcase under the stairs. Now, keep in mind, it had been there for 40 years in a cool, dry place. So Chris opened it and, it was all perfectly preserved because it hadn't been touched. So just from a preservation standpoint, it's unbelievable because, film degrades and that's a thing that happens. But also what's kind of more remarkable about it is that two women in the 1940s and 1950s owned a film camera and, used a film camera is really, really unusual. It would have been unusual if it was in the 80s and a video camera. So that it was then, that it was, that they had it developed and processed, and also that it was stored is kind of, in the historical sense, very unusual.
One of our colleagues on this film saw all of that and wondered out loud if he and his wife weren't taking enough video of their family.
Yeah.
Well, it's just the historian's dream to open up a suitcase like that and see not only all of that, but in pristine condition too.
Well, also there was stuff in there that when we had it transferred, we were seeing things that they had told us about, that we had shot of them, when they talked about going to so-and-so, we all of a sudden had film of it. So we were able to put the video, the picture to the audio, and it's like, you get goosebumps thinking about those opportunities when you're actually doing this. So that was pretty amazing. So when they move out of their house, they talk about moving in their house, and we have the film from those very early days of them moving in the place, 25 years before.
Yeah, that was incredible. I mean, we also had audio cassette tapes. Pat would take this cassette recorder to trips to Greece and to Italy, and the audio, and then we suddenly had to Brennan's point, we had the 8mm footage to go along with that. Or I remember showing Terry and Pat some old slides. I've got a picture of Terry watching these slides up on our living room wall, and suddenly we have the video footage to go with the slide. You see them wearing those pointy hats on the beach, right? So those are some slides that we had found, and then suddenly we've got the 8mm footage to go along with it, and it was just incredible. Yeah.
It's just amazing. So on some of those trips, they are joined by other people, and I kind of wanted to have you talk a little bit about the community that they forged in Chicago. They talk about leaving. They fall in love in Moose Jaw. They talk about leaving Moose Jaw, thinking they were the only ones to feel as they did, and moved to Chicago. Can you talk about the relationships they created with other same-sex couples? I'm thinking of like Jack Zargis, I think, and one of the, I'm blanking on the other man's name.
John and Jack, yeah.
Yes. Can you talk about some of those relationships that they enjoyed? And did they, look to ultimately create an expanded community? I'm thinking like the Daughters of Bilitis, for example, that was founded in 1955 as a social clubs that they could dance and interact without the fear of raids, as kind of an alternative to the bar culture. And did they look to expand their social connections and maybe even some political connections beyond a close group of friends?
First of all, we have to remember they were both immigrants, so they had the added fear of being thrown out of the United States if they were ever busted for being gay. And I think that they very successfully had a small network of friends that were gay men and gay women, and they did not go to the bars. I think ever, correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, but I think they
one time.
So they had a very protected network in which they had parties and houses. And, we thought it was really important to contextualize what it was like in Chicago then, because of all of the kind of bigger American cities, it was one of the more dangerous ones because of Mayor Daley I. They were brutal when it came to bar raids and throwing people in jail and printing what they did for a living and who they were in the newspaper so that they would lose their jobs. And as Tracy Baim, who's an incredible historian in Chicago and a writer and a publisher, says in the film, people would kill themselves when they were outed like that.
They have friends in Florida who, when they were living in Chicago, I think they both told us that they spent every New Year's Eve with.
Yeah.
And I think they seriously considered whether that was a place that they should move because Bob and John were there.
The context again for the time is just so amazing in terms of, you know, this kind of closed atmosphere to just a burgeoning of an opening. It's just such a fabulous story. Then with the backdrop of the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League on top of it, it's just phenomenal. Terry's clearly thrilled about her 4 years playing in the league. Can you talk a little bit more about that? And I love the piece where she's, you know, handing out her baseball cards and she's autographing them. It seems that, you know, the rum and cokes that you mentioned, they seemed like that might be what they were drinking in those All-American Girls Professional Baseball League cups.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Can you talk a little bit more about her career and why she left in 1950? The league continued another 4 years until 1954, and I don't think the Red Wings folded until 1951. Could you talk a little bit more about her deciding to end her career with the league?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, first of all, she just loved baseball. There are two loves she always said to me, and I think she mentions in the movie at a certain point, but our baseball, our patent baseball. And, you know, I have her glove. I've got her catcher's glove, and I've got her outfield glove that she left to me, which just means the world to me. And she used to always tell me that that glove is her heart. So she just loved baseball from a young age. Her brother, Tom, was a very talented athlete also. And, you know, she says it in the film, used to throw really hard pitches and all of that, play with the boys, right? So she got good, she got tough. Loved playing ball, you know, obviously went to Moose Jaw to play. When they won the national championship, she was drafted by Philip K. Wrigley, went down to play with the Peoria Red Wings for 4 years. Loved every minute of it. She left, Bonnie, because, you know, baseball was changing. They were changing the ball sizes. And she didn't like that as much. But I think the main reason was that Pat came down in 1950. They decided they were going to live together in Chicago. And Terry wanted to be around Pat. And with the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League at that point, there's a lot of touring around still. So there was another league that formed that was the National League. And so she decided to join the National League. I believe the team she played for was the Music Maids in Chicago. And she could play ball at night. She could work at Watson and Bowler in the day, and she could go home to Pat. So that was a big factor of why she left. And at that point, you know, and the league, the men were starting to come back also. World War II was wrapping up, and so it was changing. I mean, they peaked, I think, in 1949, and I'm sorry to the historians, the wonderful historians, if I got that wrong, but, you know, 1 million of people watched them that year. So they peaked, and then it started to slowly dissipate. So just the time felt right with Pat and with the league, with the ball size being changed. But, you know, she baseball, I mean, to the very end, was just such an important part of her life.
Was she, so the Cooperstown, of course, opened up the exhibit which honors the members of the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League. Did she go to that ceremony, and was she part of that?
Yeah, her and Pat, there's a great picture. You know that bronze statue of the woman with that's kind of iconic? They've got a great picture of Pat and Terry right behind it. And Terry did a great series at the museum called Players in Pigtails. And she was a part of the exhibit where she's reading this wonderful book about a girl wanting to be a professional baseball player. So yeah, they went, and she was part of that, of Cooperstown. And, you know, she was so proud. And she's also in the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame and the Saskatchewan Baseball Hall of Fame, which is pretty cool.
So I'm just curious, in a COVID world, what are your all plans to continue to talk about the film moving forward once we all start opening up again?
it's been really kind of surreal, this whole, COVID has been surreal on a lot of levels, but just to kind of answer the question in a narrow sense as it pertains to this film, it's, we were supposed to premiere at South by Southwest. That was canceled. We had no idea how a film like this would be received in a COVID world, in terms of its subject matter is about, people moving into a retirement home. So we were kind of fearful about that because it really can go another way. And we've just been so kind of unbelievably fortunate to have had the reaction that we've had, and people being so open, I think, to going through the emotional experience of watching this film. So we've been doing a lot of things like this. It's been strange for the three of us we haven't been together, any of us, since March. And usually when you premiere a film, you're together when that moment happens. So to have worked on this for so long with Alexa and Chris, we always, when we're on video, we just look at each other and go, guys, it's so strange not to be together. So these things are really nice to be able to kind of talk and reach out in the ways such as we can using this.
I mean, I think the answer is, as long as people ask, we'll keep talking. And everybody's been at home, so and needed a little bit of an uplift. So that's weirdly terrible, wonderful timing.
Well, I had a number of people reach out to me and tell me, oh my God, I was crying, I was weeping by the end of the film. So clearly, I think this has resonated with so many people and has really touched a whole bunch of people with the stories that you've shared and just the poignant way in which you've shared it. Let me take the opportunity now to respond to some of those people with their questions. Let me see. Whatever happened to Pat in the documentary when they married? Did each keep their last name?
They did. They kept their last names. So Pat Henschel and Terry Donahue. Yeah, they kept their last names.
Okay.
The short answer.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I said, I wish I had more to say, but that's it. Yeah, they kept their last names. Yeah.
Okay. Chris, did Terry and Pat ever explain why they didn't admit to being gay when the family would ask?
Yeah, I mean, it comes out in the film. There's that scene right after I was filming them with the letters being ripped off. And we talk about why they did that, and it comes out that they really truly believed that the family would disown them, that they wouldn't love them anymore. And my mother's relationship to Terry was more like a daughter than it was a niece, and Terry is more like a grandmother to me than a great aunt. And so I can understand it, but I can understand where they're coming from. Born in the 20s, formative years in the 1930s and the 1940s, just a different time. So they really thought they would lose the love of the family, and that terrified them. That absolutely terrified them. So that's why they kept it a secret. And I think Terry, and she says this in the film too, she was in her late 80s, and Parkinson's was starting to present symptoms. And I really believe her when she said she just didn't want to go to her grave feeling like she lived a lie. She needed to get that off of her shoulders. And you do see a change in Terry after they revealed that secret. Both of them, they would hold hands in front of us, the biological family that is. They would sneak a kiss. They would dance. They would tell stories of their romance. It changed, and it was wonderful. I think it was really important for my family to hear.
It was also kind of an amazing thing to watch as an outsider, because they were going through growing pains as out people that most people would go through now in their late teens, but mostly in their early 20s. So, it's a very scary process coming out. I don't diminish that, but also it was kind of just an amazing thing to watch, like how do we behave in the grocery store and moments of affection and things like that. So to see that with two people who had, 8 decades of wisdom and experience, but to still see them go through those growing pains was kind of an amazing thing, because, you know, they happen to you whenever you come out. You know, being 80 doesn't make that easier. It probably makes it harder because you have so much learned behavior under your own belt in terms of wrapping a string 400 times around your finger to get it off. You can't rip it off. You have to unwrap it 400 times.
They loved saying how long they'd been together. They loved declaring how many years it was.
Well, and Pat in particular, it was not, you know, 65 or almost 70. It was 65 and a half, which was absolutely adorable, I thought, the whole time. They dealt with some homophobia in their own families. So there's questions about Terry's brother coming around and accepting her and Pat's relationship. And I think Pat had a brother as well who was not terribly accepting. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I think probably the question was regarding Pat's brother. Terry's brother passed away, Tom, in the late 90s. He wasn't accepting of homosexuality, and I don't know if he would have come around or not. I don't know. Al, Pat's brother, had a really tough time with it. I don't know the answer. I know he wasn't speaking to Pat and Terry after they came out while we were filming. There was a scene that didn't quite make it into the film where there's just silence on the other end of the phone and a refusal to acknowledge it. He was the sweetest man, and he adored Terry and Pat. So I was shocked. I knew him very well on his stance about homosexuality. But he did come around and started to talk to Pat again. They would talk on the phone, but never about the marriage, never about their relationship, Pat and Terry's relationship. And I think it was just swept under the rug, and he just chose not to. I think he just chose to forget it. So he's not accepting of it.
What was your shooting ratio? How many hours of film did you have to edit through? And any scenes you wish you could have included?
That's a really good question in terms of the ratio. I don't know the exact number, but we shot over 5 years, and the film's 82 minutes. So, you make brutal decisions all of the time when you're in post-production, especially on a documentary. We have thousands of hours of footage that we shot with the whole crew, or that Chris, a lot of the kind of quieter moments, Chris was able to do literally on his own, just with a camera himself operating. So it was an unbelievable amount of cutting we had to do.
I mean, Brendan, I think it's probably like, they say 20 to 1. I feel like it's 40 to 1.
Yeah.
40 minutes of shooting for every minute that we took. I mean, we just, we had 5.5 years of footage to sift through. And a lot of wonderful scenes. I was just talking to Brendan the other day, still kind of lamenting about certain scenes that I know we have to make a film at the end of the day, but it's still like, I'm still complaining. I'm an annoying director, but I still was complaining about it. Yeah. It's hard.
I'm sure. Well, there's so much interest there. You might be able to do like the outtakes of the film for everybody too. How did this change your family, Chris? Would you say anyone else aside from yourself has taken up this story or become an activist? What did the family learn from this amazing love story? Have you thought of publishing the poems with Pat's permission, of course?
Yes, it has changed. Yeah, so I'll answer the fact with my family. It has changed my family. It changed me. It's one of the most fulfilling, rewarding experiences I have ever had in my career. I don't know if I'll ever have this opportunity again or this experience again, but working with Brendan and Alexa and our team was just such a gift. I think my mother learned some things about herself. She learned about their life. She's hearing from people LGBTQ around the world now, and it's opened up her eyes to what's happening. I think people in the United States and Canada feel like we've solved the LGBTQ issue, and we have not. We have not, and we're a step away from losing any gains that we have made. So my mother's realized that, and she's reaching out to these people in Africa who have reached out to her, who are persecuted in other countries and been profoundly affected. And then Tammy, who's in the film, you see her, the one that we interviewed by the gravesite, and Kim, the brother. Tammy said at one point she doesn't know she'd ever met anybody who was gay or lesbian. I'm sure she has, but she just is not, in her world, that's not, those discussions don't happen. And so what was wonderful to see is that my whole family, their love for Terry and Pat superseded any kind of preconceived notions that they may or may not have had before. And they ultimately embraced both of them, which I thought was beautiful. And there were struggles throughout the way, along the way, which I think we needed to show, but ultimately they loved them both. And I think they also, the relationship with Pat has also deepened in a very nice way. And I cannot remember the second part of the question now.
The question got taken off we're going to move on. We're in the time. For Alexa, how does your casting expertise affect your work as a producer, if at all?
I think it just reinforces your understanding of character and story, because that's sort of what I have to be focused on all the time as a casting director. So it supports it. It helps you to sort of find those things. I mean, Chris and I have talked a lot about character and story over the years, but I think that's the way it affects it.
Great. And I've got the second part of that question. Have
Poems.
You publishing the poems?
Yeah, my mother actually brought this up to me a year ago. And she even says it in the scene, we should make a book. And my mother and I have spoken about that. We'd really like to do something with those poems. And there's also a lot of beautiful photos that we haven't used that we'd like to put together with those poems. So yes, we have thought about it, and that was something that we would love to do.
People magazine published a couple of them 2 or 3 weeks ago, if you do a little Googling, which we all were just so unbelievably tickled by that People magazine is publishing Pat's poems, but they did, and it was really nice because they have, some of them have photo representation, which is great.
Well, and in addition to the beautiful poems, nobody writes like that anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, it's physically beautiful too.
Yeah.
It's physically beautiful, and only seeing the half piece of the paper because they felt the need to remove the other half in case anything happened to them and these would be discovered is such I think a powerful statement in the ways in which the LGBTQ community was treated at that time. This from an attendee. I was so amazed to see my own story, though sometime later, the 1970s, when everyone thought my partner was my roommate. Decades later, some told me that they had also suspected it was a gay relationship, and yet they never said anything, nor did we. I only came out last year at age 66. Thank you for sharing this story and helping me work for issues.
That's amazing.
Wow.
One of the things that became very important to us during the course of filming is it's really important to see in media versions of yourself or an aspirational version of a relationship that you would like to perhaps be in one day. And there was a real lack of, we thought, loving same-sex relationships generally in media, but specifically lesbian relationships. We could think of probably one film, Edie and Thea, that came out about 15 years ago, which was a great film, but I can't think of another one off the top of my head that shows, a 6-decade committed relationship with the romance that this one has, of course. But, that was something that we just realized that it's really important. Representation is so important. And kind of generally speaking, portrayals of lesbian women in media for 8 decades, in the first 2 decades, they were the villain. And then for the next 5 decades, there were about 10 different tropes that were kind of trotted out over and over and over again. So it's the world is a big world, and there are lots of kinds of people, and lots of kinds of relationships. So that was something in the edit we really thought we need to make sure that we do the justice that this deserves, so people can see, listen, you can't change anybody else's mind until they are presented with something else to think about. And that was kind of something that became fundamentally and deeply really important to the three of us in finishing this thing.
And thank you to that woman. I mean, that makes, stories like hers that's the greatest gift to me with this film. Hearing from people like that is just, it so profoundly affects me, and I'm glad that it resonated with her. And, I think it's so important that we see that we have this idea, people have this idea that it's only with heterosexual relationships that we can experience love like that. And Pat and Terry clearly show that is not the case. I mean, they have a love like no other.
I think the other thing that's amazing about hearing that story is that the thing that was most important to us over everything else once we finished the film is just that people see it.
Right.
And that's happened.
So it's clearly been a labor of love for all of you. One maybe final question here. How do you keep the momentum of making such a documentary over a 5-year period? Especially, there are a lot of other things that could distract you.
That's a good question. You become possessed is like the answer to, you become a possessed person that, there is no failure. And you think of Terry and her blue eyes. I mean, truly, you have to, you just have to swim. You can't sink, you have to swim.
And I think had we gone into this, the three of us, for, I don't know, all those other things, we went in for it because we all believed in the story so much. And to Alexa's earlier point of just wanting to share the story with the world, that was propelling us through this whole thing. And Terry and Pat were such wonderful women. I mean, it was wonderful getting to spend the amount of time I did with them. We all have family members that we love and that we see once or twice a year, but getting to dive into their lives like that and meet their other found family was just incredible. So that kept me motivated going throughout the whole process.
I also think there's a healthy level of anxiety that, propels you forward because of their age and because we've gotten so, even at, a 3-year marker, you're not shooting every day, obviously, but it's just, you have to, it's what Brendan says, you have to keep going. I mean, Brendan and I would have these conversations that were not melodramatic, but where we knew that we had to, the most important thing is that we had to finish it. It wasn't about anything else.
Can you speak a little to Brendan and Alexa about dealing with Netflix? Was that a long and difficult process? How did that all?
So we shot this independently for the first 4 years. And by independently, we went out and got grant money and private donors. And in the first year, we got a lot of both of those things. And we thought, wow, this is super easy. Like, why doesn't everybody make documentaries? But then we couldn't raise another dime for 2 years. And then we were fortunate that Blumhouse came in to finance us partially and to completion. After we had kind of finished a pretty final rough cut, Ryan Murphy came into our universe on this project. And if you tried to think of a better champion of a film like this, I don't think you could, other than Ryan. He's just this amazing champion of the underdog, and LGBT stories are very important to him. He has his production deal at Netflix. So that's how Netflix came on, and they gave us one note and we literally won, and we were able to go in and kind of enhance some of our graphics and change some of our music, and we tightened it up a bit. And then, the thing that's amazing about Netflix is they are in 190 countries. It is a worldwide day and date thing. When you release a film with them, we're subtitled in 26 languages. We had to do overdubbing in 9 different languages, and they press a button, and at the same time, the whole world gets to see your film. And that was what was so incredible for Chris, Alexa, and I. Because of Twitter, you get instant feedback. And after the first day, to be able to see, you can't prepare yourself for that kind of instantaneous reach, to be able to see people's reactions in places you do not expect. They're incredible people, Netflix. It's not just a company, it's real people who work there, and they're really good at their jobs.
I just have to add to that. I've worked with them in other capacities, and I could never imagine the level of support that we've had throughout in every area once we were doing it with them. I mean, it's really extraordinary.
So there's one final question. Did Terry get to see the film?
Yeah, she did. About 6 to 8 months before she passed away, I took a trip up to Canada, and we had a fine cut of the film at that point. And so I brought my hard drive and my computer up and hooked it up to the TV. Pat and Terry sat together hand in hand and watched it. And it was beautiful. I actually, I filmed a little bit on my iPhone and took some pictures of it. And I actually just watched it back a week and a half ago. And I find it really emotional, but they just sat there and shook their heads and giggled and couldn't believe it. And watching that 8mm footage of them riding bikes together, was wonderful. And of course, there's those tougher scenes. But ultimately, they understood of why my mother was pushing. I mean, they all came to an understanding with each other, and it was really great. So I'm so happy she got to see it. She kept telling me the whole thing. She's like, "Am I going to see this damn thing before I die?" I said, "I promise you, you will." And Pat's watched it 10 times. So, yeah, which is great. So yes, it was great. They sat hand in hand, and it was beautiful.
Well, thank you to all three of you for sharing Terry and Pat's love story with us. It is just, as I said, made people laugh and cry, and the whole gamut of emotions. So I can't thank you enough. And thank you to the Virginia Film Festival for hosting us today. And thank you to all the attendees for your wonderful questions. We really, really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.